On the ground, a woman named Myung recalled a voice she once thought was divine. A powerful patriarch had given her one single purpose in life: protect the child beside him. That man was Cheon Wigang, the great leader of the Cheon clan. As a young girl, Myung knelt and accepted this solemn duty as her own. The child, eldest young master Cheon Myung, simply hid behind the patriarch's robe. Kneeling there, she now admits that she did not know the truth back then. The young Cheon Myung was crying while desperately clinging to his father's robe. Myung reflects that this child would one day become the trash who ruined their clan. In the past, she bowed deeply and accepted the patriarch's command to protect him. Our story then jumps forward in time by a full 15 years. During a fierce rainstorm, it was announced that the patriarch had suddenly passed away. Cheon Myung's terrible behavior only worsened after his father's death. Soon, fresh bloodstains marked the ground as the family's prestige crumbled. The bodies of loyal clan members began to pile up on the step. Myung narrates that she alone remained by Cheon Myung's side through it all. Now an adult, she fought off assassins as his devoted escort warrior. Myung stood with her sword drawn a shield for the older Cheon Myung. Behind her, the adult Cheon Myung watched with a terrified look on his face. Two figures holding umbrellas stood in a doorway, silently watching the rainfall. Without warning, Cheon Myung drove a sword straight into Myung's back. His trembling hands forced the cold steel blade completely through her body. She looked back in disbelief, asking if a sword was her only reward. Cheon Myung just trembled with fear while clutching the hilt of the sword. Myung cried out as she fell to her knees, using her own sword for support. Impaled in the rain, she realized that you can never truly fix a person. In that same downpour, a man in a red robe stood over another kneeling man. The ground around them was littered with dead bodies and more red-cloaked guard. Man in the red robe, Cheon Myung, spoke with a look of pure distress. A group of masked guards in red hoods advanced, drawing their sword. The injured man in black ripped a sword out from his own shoulder. He panted, holding the bloody blade and whispering the name Cheon Myung. As four new people appeared, he asked if the traitor truly thought he would be spared. Did Cheon Myung really believe joining the demonic cult was the only way to survive? The injured man glared with blood on his lips, telling him he was wrong. Above the traditional buildings, a flash of purple lightning split the sky. The group of four walked forward, led by a man in a half-mask holding an umbrella. A woman from that group with stitches across her face looked up into the rain. Another member in a horned mask carried two unconscious people over his shoulder. Cheon Myung screamed in absolute terror as he saw the four approaching him. A large bearded man from the group raised a massive sword, saying they were not needed. That same bearded man leaped forward to strike as Cheon Myung turned to flee. His huge sword sliced down, cleaving Cheon Myung completely in half. The kneeling man watched the execution, his face hidden by his wet hair. Cheon Myung's severed head lay on the ground, his last thoughts filled with regret. The kneeling man thought his master was never worth protecting as he killed a guard. He should have abandoned that master long ago, he thought, remembering the past. His own sword finally fell from his hand, clattering onto the wet stone. Defeated, he knelt in the rain with his fallen sword in front of him. The remaining hooded guards surrounded him with their swords drawn as he thought no. His eyes widened in despair as he wondered who was left to blame now. A reflection in his eye showed the sky as he realized he only had regret. A flashback showed him as a nameless, disheveled youth before a grand building. He was taken in and given the name Myung, which simply meant Namel. The long-haired warrior looked up at a dark, stormy sky filled with lightning. Mortally wounded and holding a sword, he desperately wished to be reborn. He was stabbed by multiple hooded assailants while hoping for a real name. His body dissolved into black wisps as he died, wishing not to be himself again. The scene shifted to an underwater view as a cold sensation washed over him. His face appeared in the darkness as he thought about how cold death truly is. Then consciousness slowly returned to the feeling of a cloth washing his feet. His face was shown in profile as he registered the strange, warm sensation. A woman was pouring water while gently washing the feet of a large man. That large man suddenly jumped up, startling the woman and knocking her over. He knelt on the floor in utter shock, questioning how he was still alive. Then he clearly remembered his death, recalling countless swords piercing his body. The woman apologized profusely, and he recognized her as someone named Hwa-young. He recalled that Hwa-young was the maid abused by the eldest young master. As she begged for his forgiveness, he asked why she called him young master. He then asked her where the eldest young master Cheon Myung was. Hwa-young nervously informed him that he was in fact young Master Cheon Myung. The man grabbed his own large face in disbelief, wondering what was happening. He scrambled across the room to look into a basin of water on the floor. Staring at his reflection, he saw the face of the overweight young master. Later that night, he confirmed to himself that this bizarre reality was not a dream. He sat on a bed wondering how he had returned to life 15 years in the past. The large man in white robes sat silently on the edge of his bed. He remembered asking about Myung, but a servant said she had never seen such a person. Next, he wondered if his old self simply ceased to exist when he became Cheon Myung. But now he saw an opportunity to protect the Cheon clan from its future destruction. After accepting his strange new reality, he stood to observe his living quarter. He questioned internally why the eldest young master's bedchamber seemed so shabby. Noting the room's small size, his eyes were drawn to a sword on a shelf. His expression immediately shifted to surprise as he recognized the weapon. He focused on the blue-sheathed sword resting on top of a wooden shelf. A memory flashed of a man in black being stabbed by that very sword in the rain. His eyes widened as he realized it was the famous Heavenly Light sword. The legendary sword was said to be born from a single ray of light in Darkney. He picked up the sword, recalling it was a treasure gifted to the clan's eldest son. With a sudden nosebleed, he understood that this legendary sword was now high. He began to draw the blade from its scabbard, his reflection on its surface. Now he stood holding the fully unsheathed sword, which emitted a faint blue glow. Looking at the blade, he knew it was far superior to any sword he had used before. He took a low stance and began to practice, swinging the sword with great effort. His new body waddled awkwardly as he raised the long blade over his head. Straining with exertion, he shouted while bringing the heavy sword down again. He stumbled from the effort, suddenly feeling sick and losing his balance. Dropping to his hands and knees, he panted heavily next to the fallen sword. He stared at his trembling hands, shocked that his body was already at its limit. An exterior view showed the large estate at night under a bright full moon. The man now sat cross-legged on the floor in a meditative pose, looking determined. He meditated, thinking that Cheon Muryang's body should have been much stronger. A diagram showed how energy should cultivate in the dantian and flow through meridian. He discovered that in this body, large masses of energy were trapped in the dantian. These energies were colliding with each other, destroying his meridians from within. He realized this was a condition caused by the incorrect consumption of elixir. The condition was known as Gold Spoon Chi Deviation. As the scene changed, a group of men in blue uniforms were practicing with wooden swords in a courtyard. During a spar, one of the trainees was struck hard on the head. The man who was hit sat on the ground, complaining about the force of the blow. His long-haired victor taunted him and demanded the money from their bet. The defeated man angrily declared the round void while clutching his head. He suddenly looked past his opponent with a surprised expression on his face. Cheon Muryang had arrived at the training ground holding a wooden sword. The other trainees were shocked, noting it was his first time ever visiting. He struggled to swing the wooden sword, sweating and panting from the exertion. For a moment he stopped to rest as the others mocked him for giving up so quickly. Deciding weight loss was the priority, he began to run around the training ground. 3 of the trainees, including the long-haired man, watched him run with surprise. Cheon Muryang continued to jog around the courtyard as the other men watched him. The 3 men stood together, observing him as he ran into the distance. Long-haired man noted that it seemed Cheon Muryang did not intend to leave. With a smirk, the long-haired man decided he would make him want to leave. Cheon Muryang kept running around the training ground, panting heavily. He grimaced with effort, thinking his body's condition was worse than he expected. An overhead view showed him running as he thought about the elixirs turning to poison. He knew he had to prepare his body to absorb elixirs before learning martial art. Standing outside, he looked up with a shocked expression as swords flew towards him. A beam of energy hit him in the stomach, knocking him backward with a grunt. A sword flew past his head and embedded itself deep into a wooden pillar. He looked up from the ground at the sword that was now stuck in the wall. Getting to his feet, he stared in disbelief and asked if it was a real sword. A long-haired man approached, apologizing and saying the sword slipped during a spar. The long-haired man and his followers stood together, smirking at Cheon Muryang. Leader of the group laughed condescendingly while placing a hand on his chest. Cheon Muryang looked at the men with a serious expression, recognizing them. The group told him the place was dangerous and he should stay in his room. His eyes narrowed as he wondered if this was how things were back then. The long-haired man thought his warning would make the pig hide in his room. Man offered a fake apology to Cheon Muryang for the little incident. Cheon Muryang smiled, thanked them for their concern, and said he would be careful. He then turned and ran away, which surprised the group of men watching him. The men laughed as one demanded money from another for losing a bet about him. Group walked away to get a drink, leaving their long-haired leader behind. The leader clenched a money pouch and muttered Cheon Muryang's name with a scowl. Cheon Muryang was shown running quickly through the clan's courtyard by himself. He thought the warriors were despicable but knew he was too weak to fight them. Suddenly he resolved that it was fine, as his goal was the clan's secret martial art. He ran with determination, confident he could enter the Heavenly Dragon Library. Arriving at the library, he was shocked to see the entrance boarded up and chained. He turned to someone off-screen and angrily asked what they had just said. An older man sighed and said he would explain the situation one more time. A guard with a spear announced that Cheon Muryang was stripped of his successor title. Cheon Muryang looked up in shock as the guard spoke about the library. The guard then formally denied him entry to the library at the top of the stair. Having been turned away, he walked back toward his quarters with heavy step. He returned to his room and collapsed onto the edge of his bed. There he sat silently on his bed, facing the closed doors of his small room. Now he understood why his room was so shabby after losing his title. He thought about his failed plan to find a method for absorbing elixir. Inside him, he reflected that the original Cheon Muryang did not have a smooth childhood. A memory showed a young Cheon Muryang surrounded by mocking hostile subordinate. He wondered if Muryang's loneliness led him to see his own escort as an enemy. Then he clenched his fist on the bedsheet, deciding he did not need those excuses. Gritting his teeth, he blamed Muryang's own behavior for his lack of ally. He sniffed the air, thinking that he himself was a loner due to his training. His attention was suddenly drawn to a pink box sitting on a nearby table. He opened the box to find 2 plates of mushroom dishes which he found bland. While eating, he wondered how Muryang got fat on this food, then had a realization. An exterior shot of the estate appeared as he thought Muryang had one ally. The next day, the sun shone on the clan's buildings as he began to train. He stood in a courtyard performing warm-up stretches with visible effort. A close-up showed him panting heavily from the simple warm-up exercise. He complained that his body was achy and overwhelmed by the light exertion. A woman approached him from behind, surprised to see him awake so early. The woman Wo Yang held a tray and asked if he was training again today. Man in blue robes spoke to a woman in the courtyard, wishing her a good day. The woman walked past him carrying a bundle of clothes, and he watched her go. He asked if the bundle she was carrying was his laundry, which startled her. She turned and apologized for the delay, explaining she had dozed off while waiting. He smiled to himself, thinking that she was his only ally at the moment. Next, he took a sudden step toward the woman, causing her to flinch in surprise. He placed a hand on her shoulder and thanked her, much to her shock. The woman looked utterly flustered and confused by his unexpected kin. He asked her to work harder, explaining there would be more laundry for a while. After speaking, he turned and ran away across the large stone courtyard. The woman watched him leave with a surprised and blushing expression on her face. Later that night, under a full moon, the man began to run around the estate. He ran along a deserted walkway within the clan's compound during the night. For a moment, he continued his run, his large body struggling with the physical exertion. A close-up showed him panting and sweating profusely as he pushed himself onward. He thought to himself that he felt like he was dying from the effort of running. A flashback showed a man yelling at a younger Mu Myong during training. The instructor berated the young Mu Myong for wanting to see a festival. Young Mu Myong accepted the punishment of performing a strike 100 times. While Mu Myong trained, the instructor complained about how slow the movements were. In the background, the young master urged the patriarch to go to the festival. Mu Myong stood alone with a training dummy, wondering if they ever decided anything for themselves. The young master and the patriarch enjoyed the festival as fireworks lit the sky. Back in the present, the man gritted his teeth and smiled through the pain. He continued running under the moon, thinking to himself that this was fun. A woman watched from behind a large drum as he stumbled while running at night. The woman Wo Yang looked on with a worried expression, murmuring his title. He suddenly collapsed from exhaustion in the courtyard, and she reacted with alarm. Wo Yang carried the unconscious man on her back, proving to be surprisingly strong. On another day, he was running again, this time through a heavy downpour. A group of trainees watched him, commenting on his persistence even in the rain. The long-haired man Neong Ryowoon angrily handed over a pouch after losing a bet. Neong Ryowoon shouted in frustration, calling the man's training efforts pathetic. He dismissed a warning to be quiet, stating the man lost his title anyway. Suddenly, he continued his rant, claiming the man would hold no real power as patriarch. He explained the Council of Elders, and a commander held the clan's true authority. Another trainee told the angry man to stop complaining just because he lost a bet. The group of trainees walked away from the rain, leaving their leader standing alone. Long-haired leader glared after them, muttering about how annoying this was. He turned his attention back to Cheon Muryang, who continued to run past him. There, he internally called the man a fool for thinking this act would regain his title. Cheon Muryang ran directly past the watching man without acknowledging his presence. The long-haired man scowled, believing Cheon Muryang heard his insults but ignored them. From a distance, Wo Yang watched the long-haired man, observing Cheon Muryang. She stood under an awning holding folded clothes while watching the tense scene. A close-up revealed Wo Yang's determined and slightly angry expression. The scene changed to a bright sunny day after the rain had finally passed. Camera focused on a rack holding several real swords in the training area. Cheon Muryang reached out and firmly gripped the hilt of one of the sword. He now stood in the courtyard holding the real sword with a serious look. Cheon Muryang practiced with a real sword, swinging it with a focused expression. He smiled to himself with satisfaction, thinking that his progress was good. Inside him, he felt he had enough stamina to wield a sword, which would speed up his recovery. His training was interrupted by shouting as he turned to see a confrontation nearby. He saw a group of warriors surrounding a woman with a long-haired man at the center. The woman was yelling at the men, telling them not to insult the young master. Cheon Muryang watched the scene unfold with a neutral expression, a snack in his mouth. He recognized the woman as Wo Yang, held by the collar by the long-haired man. The long-haired man, Neong Ryowoon, angrily dared Wo Yang to repeat her word. Wo Yang glared back defiantly, demanding he take back his insult. The other warriors gossiped about the situation but decided to walk away. Naeong Ryawun's eye twitched with rage as he called her an insolent maid. Wol Yang sweated but continued to stare him down, refusing to be intimidated. Enraged by her defiance, Naeong Ryawun reached for the hilt of his sword. He drew his sword and threatened to see if her attitude changed at knife point. As he swung his blade down, another sword intercepted his with a loud clang. Naeong Ryawun looked to his side in shock, questioning what was happening. Cheon Moriang stood there, having blocked the attack to protect Wol Yang. The long-haired man stared in disbelief, recognizing the eldest young master. Cheon Moriang glared at Naeong Ryawun with a serious and determined expression. Naeong Ryawun stammered, nervously, looking flustered by the unexpected intervention. Cheon Moriang told him to raise his sword, which confused the other man. He declared that any insult for Wol Yang would have to go through him first. Cheon Moriang then pointed his sword forward, challenging him to speak with his blade. Naeong Ryawun stared back in shock, asking if this was a challenge to a duel. Cheon Moriang smirked slightly as he proposed a duel to the long-haired man. He stood opposite the man holding a wooden sword against his opponent's steel one. Then he stated that if he wins, the man will not make an issue of this incident. Wol Yang watched in distress, thinking she must stop him as he was untrained. Cheon Moriang slammed his wooden sword into the ground with a powerful strike. Wol Yang looked on in shock as the wooden sword stood embedded in the dirt. With his hand on the sword, he said that he can tolerate insults to himself. He continued that he will not tolerate insults toward those who care for him. Declaring it his creed, he told his opponent, Naeong Ryawun, to raise his sword. Naeong Ryawun asked if he promised to leave, and Cheon Moriang confirmed his word. Naeong Ryawun thought Cheon Moriang had no chance of winning, but he had to fight. Cheon Moriang held his wooden sword, calling his current body a pathetic deadbeat. His expression was fierce as a blue aura emanated from him and his sword. Naeong Ryawun looked startled, sensing an unfathomable spirit from Cheon Moriang. Cheon Moriang gritted his teeth and asked his opponent if he was afraid to fight. As Naeong Ryawun hesitated, Cheon Moriang said that if he would not come forward, then he would initiate the attack, lunging forward with surprising speed. He swung his wooden sword, which created a wide arc of glowing blue energy. Naeong Ryawun blocked the attack and taunted him for being too slow for a death match. Their weapons clashed as the wooden sword met the steel blade. A bright flash of light and sparks erupted from the point of impact. Naeong Ryawun's sword was knocked from his grasp and sent flying into the air. The sword landed and stuck into the ground as Naeong Ryawun stared in disbelief. Naeong Ryawun looked completely shocked, wondering how he was just disarmed. He realized his opponent aimed for his sword and used his own force against him. The long-haired man wondered when the deadbeat had become so strong. Cheon Moriang criticized his opponent for being careless in a life-or-death match. The long-haired man knelt defeated on the ground as Cheon Moriang called him pathetic. Standing over his opponent, Cheon Moriang declared him unqualified to wield a sword. Blood dripped from his hand as he told the man to find a reason to fight. He promised to fight for the sword again once the man found his purpose. The defeated man knelt in a blue aura, contemplating the reason to wield a sword. Cheon Moriang called for Wol Yang and they began to walk away from the training ground. The defeated man reached out with a shocked expression as they departed. His hand remained outstretched and empty as they walked further into the distance. From his kneeling position, he watched Cheon Moriang and Wol Yang leave. Later, Wol Yang was shown entering a room through an open wooden door. Her feet stepped onto the mat as she came fully inside the room. Inside, she apologized to Cheon Moriang, saying she should not have interfered. Kneeling on the floor, she explained she got emotional seeing others mock him. Prostrating herself, she apologized again, saying he hurt his hand because of her. He told her not to apologize, thinking his injury was from a straining technique. Wol Yang looked up from the floor with a surprised expression. He declared he will tolerate insults to himself, but not to those who care for him. Next, he smiled, adding that he will not hold back when protecting his people. Wol Yang looked up in shock as she was reminded of her New Year's wish. A flashback showed a young Cheon Moriang at a festival wishing to become strong. He vowed to become a strong patriarch like an elephant and start sword training. The young Cheon Moriang gave a thumbs up, promising to protect Wol Yang too. In the present, 2 tears fell from Wol Yang's eyes onto the stone floor. Wiping away a tear, Wol Yang thought that this is the eldest young master. She realized this is the young master she used to know as he stood before her. A stern man with intense eyes interrupted, questioning Cheon Moriang's word. The man asked if Cheon Moriang could take responsibility for what he just said. This man was Cheon Moriang's uncle, holding a sword with a serious expression. Another man's feet stepped forward, described as one of the clan's 3 pillar. An imposing bearded man in a red cloak now stood before them in the room. This man, the general commander, repeated the question about taking responsibility. Cheon Moriang greeted the man Cheon Seon Hak as his uncle and apologized. He internally reflected on meeting the commander he once trusted most in this life. The uncle dismissed the greeting and angrily demanded an answer to his question. Cheon Muriang recalled that the commander's disdain for him was the same 15 years ago. He answered that he protects his people and that this is his creed. The uncle's eye twitched with rage as he scoffed at Cheon Muriang's claim. He said Cheon Muriang defiled those words and identified his technique as Dragon's Claw. The uncle stated the technique was secret, so it must have been learned from a traitor. He vowed to find and punish the traitor challenging Cheon Muriang to protect them. The uncle threatened to ban him from the training grounds if he failed to do so. Cheon Muriang looked down and began to reveal who the supposed traitor was. The uncle glared intently, gritting his teeth while waiting for the name. Cheon Muriang thought to himself that he must choose his words very carefully. He looked up and declared that the traitor was no one. The uncle reacted with a shocked expression, questioning his nephew's answer. Cheon Muriang explained he only saw the technique once and simply imitated it. The uncle scoffed loudly, expressing his complete disbelief at the explanation. A bearded man with long hair tied back laughed with his eyes closed. The man's expression shifted from laughter to a serious, tight-lipped frown. He glared with an angry expression, calling the situation ridiculous. The man's hand gripped the ornate hilt of his sword, beginning to draw it. He leaped down into the courtyard, sword drawn towards Cheon Muriang. The bearded man challenged Cheon Muriang to draw his sword to be tested. Cheon Muriang looked nervous and sweated as he held his own sword defensively. The bearded man stood surrounded by a menacing red aura, his eyes glowing. Cheon Muriang challenged him to show a sword art he did not know how to imitate. The bearded man looked on with a shocked and disbelieving expression. Blood dripped from Cheon Muriang's hand as he held it over his other arm. The bearded man accused Cheon Muriang of lying and said he could not be trusted. He turned to Wolyang, addressing her as the young master's maid. The commander asked her what the deadbeat she serves was currently plotting. He glared down at her and warned her not to speak a single lie. The commander threatened to cut her down immediately if she was dishonest. Wolyang looked up at him with a terrified expression, a bead of sweat on her face. She clenched her fists nervously and stammered that for the past month, he had. A montage showed his recent activities as she said he has been smiling constantly. The commander looked completely shocked and confused by her answer. He questioned if the man full of anger was really smiling. Wolyang nervously confirmed his question, clutching her chest as her heart pounded. She recalled watching him run at night, saying that even while running around, a split view showed him running above and her blushing face below as she said he was smiling. The scene shows Cheon Muriang running exhausted, but with a determined expression. An older man with a beard addressed Wolyang, asking if she saw everything. Wolyang explained that he was smiling because he was happy to be working for himself. She continued her testimony, stating he ignored the others who were mocking him. For a moment, she emotionally recounted that he drew his sword for her sake, unlike his past self. Wolyang declared with conviction that the young master has changed, and she believes him. The older man listened intently, asking if she truly believed that he has changed. A close-up of the older man's eye showed him seriously considering her word. He turned to Cheon Muriang, asking what martial arts he knew, and received his answer. The older man held up 2 fingers, offering Cheon Muriang a period of 2 months. He challenged Cheon Muriang to defeat the head disciple within that time to earn his trust. The older man leaned in with an intense expression, asking if he could do it. Cheon Muriang thought to himself that this man always used to test him this way. He confidently countered the offer, stating that 1 month was more than enough time. The older man stared silently at Cheon Muriang, processing his bold declaration. Man's hands tightened around the hilt of his sword as he made his decision. He accepted the terms, saying so be it before turning to walk away. Cheon Muriang watched him leave with a confident smirk on his face. He turned to Wolyang, who looked surprised, and told her they should go back. With his sword on his shoulder, he cheerfully announced that he needed to run more. Wolyang smiled and agreed as they watched the older man depart down a long corridor. 15 days later, Cheon Muriang was shown drawing his sword from its sheath. He practiced in the courtyard, executing a swift and powerful downward slash. Suddenly, he thought about reaching the 5th stage but struggled with the yin energy. Standing in the training area, he wished for a higher-level cultivation method. He looked at his healed hand, wishing his damaged Dantian would recover so easily. Cheon Muriang overheard someone sarcastically remarking on the chance to teach him a lesson. A group of trainees gossiped with one, saying the duel's outcome was obvious. He internally concluded the commander spread rumors to make him give up early. A close-up showed his sweating face as he processed this thought with a Another group of warriors mocked him, saying he couldn't tell a sword from a hoe. Cheon Muriang suddenly appeared and grabbed the chin of their leader, asking about their story. Looking down at the man, he asked if he was the head disciple. The seated man, marked with a character on his headband, looked up in confusion. Head disciple smirked, confirming his title and promising to end the duel quickly. Cheon Muriang thought the man's face was familiar and asked for his name. The head disciple introduced himself as Lee Seokgi while clasping his hand. Cheon Muriang reacted with shock, internally repeating the name Lee Seokgi. He remembered that Lee Seokgi was the one who leaked clan information to the demonic cult. Cheon Muriang gritted his teeth in anger upon recalling the man's betrayal. As Cheon Muriang walked away, Lee Seokgi mockingly said he was honored. He had only planned to do his best, but now his entire mindset had changed. With pure fury in his eyes, he vowed that the traitor Lee Seokgi would pay. 15 days later, a huge crowd gathered in the arena for the promised duel. Spectators in the crowd gossiped about how badly Cheon Muriang would be defeated. An official with a goatee shouted for silence from the noisy crowd. The official announced the beginning of the duel arranged by Commander Cheon Seon-hak. A bearded man in a red robe seated on a throne ordered them to call the name. The announcer called for contestant Lee Seokgi, who walked up to the platform. Lee Seokgi stood confidently on the dueling platform, holding a wooden sword. The announcer then called for the second contestant Cheon Muriang to come forward. Announcer waited with a serious face, but Cheon Muriang was nowhere in sight. Looking down at the empty stairs, he called out the young master's name again. The crowd of trainees began to whisper that he must have run away in fear. One of the trainees scoffed, clearly amused by the whole embarrassing situation. Soon the entire group was laughing at the eldest young master's expected cowardice. From a balcony above, the general commander watched the scene unfold silently. Then a sudden voice announced that Cheon Muriang had finally arrived. Both Lee Seokgi and the commander looked completely surprised by this turn of event. From the platform, Lee Seokgi saw him entering the arena with Wol Yong. Cheon Muriang calmly walked up the stairs, carrying a simple wooden sword. Murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd about this unfamiliar man. Suddenly, a spectator shouted out that it was the eldest young master. He looked up confidently and announced that he was ready for the duel. Everyone was shocked by his changed appearance and how much weight he had lost. His gaze then shifted up toward the balcony where his uncle was seated. Cheon Muriang bowed respectfully and apologized to his uncle for being late. The general commander simply dismissed the apology and asked if he was ready. With a smirk, Cheon Muriang confirmed he was ready and took his stance. He now stood opposite Lee Seokgi on the platform, prepared to fight. Lee Seokgi internally scoffed at this newfound confidence, finding it absurd. He wondered why the general commander had even allowed this duel to happen. Seeing other high-ranking commanders present, he realized this was an opportunity. A smirk crossed Lee Seokgi's face as he decided to impress them all. Cheon Muriang could tell his opponent was scheming to impress his superior. He remembered Lee Seokgi as a cunning wretch who leeched off the powerful. His mind went back to when Lee Seokgi joined the Heavenly Dragon Sword unit. That memory showed him using flattery to gain power and his past self's favor. He then recalled how that same man's greed led him to leak intelligence. In his past life, he had realized the betrayal far too late for justice. Now he resolved to stop Lee Seokgi before he could commit those crimes. He figured his opponent's schemes had likely succeeded so far in this life. A small knowing smirk appeared on Cheon Muriang's face as he waited. Looking at his wooden sword, he decided Lee Seokgi's career ended today. The announcer stated the match would continue until he called a stop. Cheon Muriang stood ready on the platform, holding his sword with both hands. Opposite him, Lee Seokgi held his own sword with a confident smirk. From his throne, Commander Cheon Seon-hak shouted for the duel to begin. Cheon Muriang immediately lunged forward, swinging his sword to start the fight. Lee Seokgi calmly watched his opponents advance, holding his ground. With a leap, Cheon Muriang brought his sword down in a powerful overhead strike. Lee Seokgi said he heard this was the bizarre technique had used before. He held his own sword horizontally to block, asking how he'd handle it. Cheon Muriang's expression was focused and intense as he pressed his attack. His opponent challenged him to try and break through the horizontal block. The two wooden swords collided with a bright flash of light on impact. Cheon Muriang looked surprised by the block, while Lee Seokgi just grinned. The block successfully deflected his sword upward, breaking his posture completely. With his opponent now off balance, Lee Seokgi ducked low to counterattack. But Lee Seokgi's wooden sword suddenly shattered into multiple pieces from the force. Cheon Muriang grunted as his own sword made contact with his opponent's shoulder. Lee Seokgi attacked, saying he had planned to end this duel gently. Cheon Muriang blocked the downward strike with his own sword, creating a spark. His opponent grabbed his wrist, stating he couldn't miss this chance to show off. Cheon Muriang gritted his teeth in pain as Lee Seokgi told him not to resent him. Smirking, the man held his arm and prepared to deliver another blow. He executed a sweeping slash that knocked Cheon Muriang completely off balance. Cheon Muriang cried out as he was thrown backward from the force of the attack. He looked on with a surprised and sweating expression after being struck. A strange pink aura of energy began to gather around Lee Seokgi. He grinned menacingly and told the young master to watch him very closely. Announcing his technique, he swung his sword, creating a glowing red arc. Cheon Muriang looked shocked as multiple red energy slashes flew toward him. The next moment, he was being struck repeatedly by the red energy attack. He screamed in pain while Lee Seogi noted the difference in their power. Cheon Muryang collapsed onto the ground as his opponent walked away from him. Lee Seogi looked to the commander, saying the duel showed his skill. He confidently clenched his fist in a clear gesture of his victory. Raising his fist, he declared that everything went just as he had planned. He called for cheers from the crowd, but was met with complete silence. Looking around, he wondered why the training ground suddenly seemed sideways. A dazed and confused expression crossed his face as he looked around. Suddenly, a foot pressed down firmly on the back of his head. He looked up in shock to see Cheon Muryang standing right over him. Cheon Muryang looked down at his fallen opponent and asked if he had a nice nap. Lying on the ground, Lee Seogi wondered why his body wouldn't move. He was completely dazed with saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. The defeated man lay on the platform, his broken sword lying nearby. His eyes fell on the shattered remains, realizing it was his own sword. A close-up showed his eye wide with shock and utter disbelief. He began to remember the duel, recalling Cheon Muryang's strange movement. The memory showed the exact moment his wooden sword had shattered on impact. In that instant, Cheon Muryang had held his own sword vertically to block. A close-up revealed his determined eye from behind the crossed wooden sword. The flashback continued with Cheon Muryang executing a powerful downward slash force of that blow struck Lee Seogi, directly sending him flying. He was thrown clear across the platform by the incredibly powerful strike. Back in the present, he lay on the ground, finally processing his defeat. He couldn't believe that he had actually lost to Cheon Muryang. Looking down, Cheon Muryang called him a potential traitor for all to hear. He warned the man to watch his steps, stating he would be watching. Lee Seogi tried to rationalize his loss, claiming he just let his guard down. Lying on the ground, he wondered what he was supposed to do now. He concluded that he was completely and utterly screwed after this defeat. The crowd of trainees murmured in shock, wondering how it ended so quickly. Wolyang watched with tears in her eyes, whispering young master in relief. Cheon Muryang stood on the platform, looking up towards the elder's balcony. Commander Cheon Seon-hak sat on his throne, looking down with a thoughtful expression. Cheon Muryang stood confidently over the body of the defeated Lee Seogi. The commander stared down from his seat with a serious, unreadable expression. From the platform, Cheon Muryang looked up with a slight confident smirk. The trainees murmured amongst themselves, watching him stand over his opponent. In the crowd, one trainee's hands were shown clenching his robes in anger. The scarred trainee thought that the idiot had ruined a perfect opportunity. He gritted his teeth, internally repeating just how pissed off he was. A different trainee in a blue uniform suddenly leaped onto the dueling platform. The new challenger landed on the platform near the defeated trainee. He stood over the fallen man holding a wooden sword with determination. From the balcony, the general commander silently observed this unexpected turn. The crowd questioned how the head disciple could have lost in a single move. Another trainee complained that this victory would only make the deadbeat cockier. The general commander closed his eyes, his face showing a stern expression. He then stood up from his throne, preparing to announce the match winner. Cheon Muryang suddenly shouted to the crowd that he knew their grievance. The general commander turned his head, surprised by his nephew's sudden outburst. He continued shouting, admitting his past wrongs and calling himself trash. Both the general commander and Wolyang watched with concerned expression. He said he couldn't remember all the faces he had wronged over the year. A flashback showed his former obese self, stating those deeds belonged to him. In the present, he declared that he would shoulder the price of those sins. He turned his back to the commanders and faced the crowd of trainees. Then he shouted to them, all apologizing for the evil deeds he had committed. Following his words, Cheon Muryang performed a deep and respectful bow. A wide view showed him bowing to the entire assembly of trainees. The trainees in the stands looked on with shock and complete confusion. Wolyang watched with a worried look on her face, clutching her dagger. The general commander stared down from the balcony with a stern, intense gaze. Cheon Muryang turned on the platform, looking up toward the commanders again. He shouted an open challenge to anyone whose anger had not yet subsided. Next, he declared that he would be waiting on the training grounds for them. With a confident smirk, Cheon Muryang turned his back to the balcony. The commander watched silently from above as his nephew stood there waiting. Cheon Muryang told Wolyang that it was now time for them to leave. The commander stroked his beard, watching them depart with a thoughtful look. As they walked, he thanked Wolyang for holding the sword he brought. He asked for the sword back, but she clutched it and asked him why. Cheon Muryang looked flustered and stammered, unsure of how to answer her. She hugged the sword, saying she needed to hold Soano a little longer. He looked completely baffled, questioning the strange name she gave the weapon. A voice from behind asked what he had intended to cut, making him turn. The general commander stood in a doorway, having followed them from the ground. Cheon Muryang smiled slightly, thinking he had heard this question before. The commander asked again what he intended to cut with his sword technique. A close-up of his mouth showed him confidently answering with the sky. He looked up with a bright smile, repeating that he meant to cut the sky. The commander's eyes widened in shock before he scoffed at the ridiculous idea. He thought to himself that this was the path he had pursued his entire life. The commander conceded that Cheon Muriang won their bet and offered a wish. Cheon Muriang asked to enter a library, but his uncle said that was impossible. With his first request denied, he stroked his chin and thought of another. He then asked the commander to assign one person to duel him every day. Commander Cheon Seonhak asked if simple duels would be enough for training. Cheon Muriang confirmed it was, stating that actual combat is the best training. The commander looked at him silently with a serious and thoughtful expression. Turning to leave, he told Cheon Muriang that he would grow stronger each day. Cheon Muriang held his wooden sword and replied that was what he hoped for. The commander walked away, leaving the two of them standing in the courtyard. Wolyang asked about the sky, and he called it a secret between them. The next day arrived over a wide shot of the training compound. A trainee kicked the ground in frustration, shouting that he was pissed off. The muscular trainee complained about daily duels and Lee Seok-gis incompetence. He stopped and reconsidered his anger, deciding this new situation was better. His hands gripped the hilt of his sheathed sword with grim determination. The scarred trainee drew his sword from its sheath with a serious look. A close-up showed the reflection of his scarred eye on the polished blade. A flashback showed a drunk, overweight Cheon Muriang yelling at people at night. That version of him held a sword to a man who questioned his action. Inside a tavern, the trainee watched as others warned him not to interfere. The younger-looking trainee wanted to intervene, but his friend advised against it. Overweight Cheon Muriang raised his sword to strike, shouting he wasn't a joke. The man on the ground screamed a warning for the young master to dodge. Trainee blocked the sword with his own, his face splattered with blood. Blood dripped from the tip of the trainee's sword onto the wooden floor. The old Cheon Muriang scolded the trainee for getting in his way. Trainee touched the fresh bleeding wound on his face in disbelief. While the man on the ground pleaded, the young master dismissed the intervention. A man's scarred face reflected in a sword blade as he called him a bastard. Identified as Cha Myung-hak, he vowed to leave an identical scar on his face. In a training yard, Cheon Muriang leaped high into the air with his sword. He continued his jump, raising his sword for a powerful downward strike. Cheon Muriang brought his sword down in a focused slash during his practice. Cha Myung-hak watched from the steps as he continued practicing in the distance. He grumbled angrily that Cheon Muriang was ignoring him after requesting the duel. While he declared his intent for a deathmatch, Wolyang offered him tea. Cha Myung-hak turned his head with a confused and irritated expression. Wolyang explained that the young master loses focus while training. Cha Myung-hak recognized her, but declined the offer, citing his upcoming duel. Wolyang held the tray with a calm, pleasant expression on her face. A bead of sweat formed on Cha Myung-hak's face as he watched intently. Wolyang also had a bead of sweat on her face, her expression serene. He asked if Cheon Muriang trained like this every day, and she confirmed it. She expressed that while his dedication was good, she worried for his health. Cha Myung-hak questioned why she cared for the man who used to torment her. She replied that the young master has changed and is trying to do better. Wolyang stated with a gentle look that she believes in his sincerity. Sipping tea, Cha Myung-hak admitted that the eldest young master had changed. He observed that Cheon Muriang was just repeating a single jump and slash. His eyes suddenly widened as he noticed something specific about the movement. He focused on the exact placement of his landing foot with each repetition. His observation extended to the height of the sword and his grip. He realized every motion was identical and wondered about his swordsmanship. Cha Myung-hak internally commented on the sword path as he practiced his jump. He looked up with a strained expression, beginning to realize something was wrong. An imaginary sequence showed the practice strike aimed directly at his face. In his mind, the sword stopped just millimeters from his eye with pressure. Back in reality, Cha Myung-hak sweated and looked up in a state of shock. He gritted his teeth, wondering if he had been the target all along. Cheon Muriang stopped his training and apologized to him for the long wait. He stood in the training yard and greeted Cha Myung-hak by his full name. Cha Myung-hak looked surprised and asked how he could possibly know his name. Cheon Muriang explained he was trying to memorize the names of all warrior. Cha Myung-hak looked on silently, considering the strange idea. Cheon Muriang then noticed the scar on his face and asked if he caused it. With a tense expression, Cha Myung-hak confirmed that he was responsible. Cheon Muriang understood, realizing this, explained the killing intent, head felt. He slowly and deliberately sheathed his sword. Cheon Muriang performed a formal bow, apologizing for the scar his mistake caused. From the courtyard, Cha Myung-hak and Wolyang watched him bowing on the step. He questioned the apology, recalling the old Cheon Muriang never admitted fault. For a moment, he wondered if this was the same person and if the maid was right. Cha Myung-hak picked up his teacup from the tray and admitted his defeat. He clarified that he had lost for today, much to Cheon Muriang's confusion. Cha Myung-hak promised to prepare properly and challenge him again another time. He turned and walked away, leaving a baffled Cheon Muriang watching him go. Cheon Muriang asked Wolyang if she thought his apology was accepted. Wolyang replied perhaps, while thinking to herself that he did not smile. Cheon Moryang turned to Wo Young and told her he had a favor to ask. He asked if she could write down a complete list of all his past misdeed. Suddenly, he also told her to include any wrongs he did to her, and she agreed. He thought that righting his wrongs was a burden he must now carry. The daily duels began the very next day at the clan compound. A trainee charged at Cheon Moryang, shouting that this was his karma. Cheon Moryang leaped into the air over his opponent, preparing his sword. He executed a powerful downward slash that connected with the charging trainee. The trainee was knocked to the ground, his wooden sword falling beside him. Cheon Moryang stood over the defeated man and told him it was a good fight. The defeated trainee clutched his shoulder in pain as Wo Young watched. Wo Young made a playful face as she added a tally mark to a board. The defeated trainee looked down, questioning if he really lost so easily. A montage of Cheon Moryang's past and present actions appeared behind him. The trainee turned and walked away from the training ground, muttering a curse. A wooden board showed a long column of tally marks for wins and none for loss. An overhead shot showed Cheon Moryang sitting in meditation on a balcony. He meditated with a blue aura, unable to melt the yin energy inside him. An internal view showed a blue energy sphere representing his blocked chi flow. His eyes glowed blue as he exhaled, realizing he had reached his limit. He wondered if his only option was to learn a new method from the library. His expression shifted to confusion as he felt he forgot something important. His eyes widened in sudden realization as he exclaimed that he remembered. He quickly got to his feet, stating that the patriarch was returning today. There he thought about his benefactor as two shadows appeared behind closed door. Cheon Moryang stood in his room holding a sheathed sword with a thoughtful look. He thought about a past dream where he had to call someone father. A voice urgently called for the eldest young master, making him look up. Wo Young's friend Hua Hong ran to him in a panic, saying Wo Young was in trouble. Hua Hong tearfully explained that Wo Young was currently with his fiancée. Cheon Moryang's expression turned to one of shock and deep concern. The scene changed to a plate of food spilled across a stone floor. Wo Young trembled on her hands and knees next to the spilled food. She repeatedly apologized while bowing on the ground before an ornate woman. A close-up revealed the woman's cold, unimpressed expression as she looked down. An overhead view showed Wo Young surrounded by the woman and her many guard. An inverted shot of Wo Young's face showed her sweating with pure terror. The woman stated that an apology could not clean her stained clothes. She raised a fan to her face and ordered her men to proceed. A bearded guard acknowledged the command with a nod and turned to Wo Young. The guard stood over the bowing girl and drew a long, curved sword. He raised the sword high above his head, preparing to execute her. Hua Hong was shown running toward the scene, shouting in protest. The guard's gleaming sword swung down with force toward Wo Young's neck. Cheon Moryang leaped in and deflected the guard's blade with his own sword. The guard and the woman with the fan looked on with surprised expression. Cheon Moryang landed in a crouched position, his face set with determination. The surrounding guards reacted with shock as their comrade's attack was blocked. He stood protectively in front of Wo Young and asked what was happening. The guards demanded to know who he was to interfere with their affair. A woman identified the man before her as Cheon Moryang, the eldest young master. Surrounded by armed guards, she apologized and introduced herself as from the Tang clan. Hiding her face behind a fan, she revealed her name was Tang So-hai. Cheon Moryang internally recognized the name of his wife from his past life. He recalled her title from his past life, Ice Flower Tang So-hai. A flashback explained the Tang clan's skill with poisons was to cure him. The Tang clan accepted the marriage proposal to advance their own influence. His past obese self was shown passed out on a bed as she looked on. Over 10 years, the patriarch showed weakness which the Tang clan exploited. The marriage to Tang So-hai had begun the Cheon clan's eventual downfall. Back in the present, Cheon Moryang addressed Tang So-hai and her entourage. He sternly asked her what she was doing in his clan's territory. Tang So-hai looked at the bloodstains on her white sleeve and replied calmly. She explained she was punishing a maid who stained her expensive clothes. Cheon Moryang angrily asked if she tried to kill a maid for that reason. Tang So-hai said he only saw a maid and not the value of her clothes. She justified her actions by stating the maid could have been an assassin. Cheon Moryang shouted that this was the Cheon clan where their laws ruled. He drew his sword and stood before the maid, saying she insulted his people. She retorted that he was insulting the Tang clan's laws, which they would enforce. Tang So-hai bit her lip and challenged him to try and stop them. One of her guards drew his sword, which began to glow with purple energy. Cheon Moryang recognized the glowing energy as sword chi as the guard attacked. The guard's energized sword clashed with Cheon Moryang's own blade. Cheon Moryang looked shocked as he struggled against the force of the attack. The energized sword pushed Cheon Moryang back as he struggled to block the blow. Wo Young watched with a worried expression, calling out young master. Tang So-hai calmly pulled a long, thin needle from her intricate heater. A close-up showed the sharp silver needle held between her finger. The guard lunged forward, swinging his glowing sword in a wide horizontal arc. Cheon Muriang parried the strike, their blades clashing multiple times. He internally noted the guard's strength, identifying him as a first-rate warrior. Cheon Muriang thought that he was overwhelmed by the man's superior energy. The two swordsmen paused for a moment, facing each other after the exchange. Deciding on a new strategy, Cheon Muriang firmly planted his foot. He leaped into the air, initiating a technique called Sword of Subtlety. His internal monologue stated that he would not target the opponent himself. He flew through the air towards the guard, with his sword held ready. Inside him, he continued his thought, clarifying that he would target the sword instead. He planned to snatch the guard's sword the moment it entered his range. Then he executed his special move. Dragon Claw Rain, aiming at the guard's blade. A brilliant white light exploded at the point where their two swords met. The impact caused a visual of a sword blade shattering into piece. Guard glared with a look of intense concentration and anger. Cheon Muriang was thrown off balance, now unarmed, as the guard stood firm. In a state of shock, Cheon Muriang realized that he had lost his sword. His sword with its red tassel clattered onto the stone tiles of the courtyard. The guard looked down on him, remarking that he expected an amazing technique. Cheon Muriang gritted his teeth as Tang So-hai shouted, "That's enough." Tang So-hai walked forward, commenting on her fiancé caring for a maid. She told Cheon Muriang she would see him at the banquet tonight. Hua Hong knelt over an unconscious Wo Young and cried out for the young master. Cheon Muriang turned around with a shocked and worried expression on his face. He shouted Wo Young's name and ran to her side past the guard. Tang So-hai noted his physical condition was better than she was told. She turned to one of her guards and asked how he was during their fight. The guard reported that Cheon Muriang was weak and had poor internal power. She ordered the guard to mobilize 4 men to stop him from attending the banquet. Cheon Muriang held the unconscious Wo Young in his arms, trying to wake her. He noticed her weak state and wondered if she had been poisoned. His angry gaze fell upon the spilled food on the ground nearby. A flashback showed Wo Young smiling as she offered to bring him his meal. In the memory, she happily carried a tray, promising it was not mushroom. Back in the present, Cheon Muriang gritted his teeth in silent fury. He lifted Wo Young into his arms and shouted in frustration while carrying her. Next, he tossed his sword to Hua Hong, telling her to take care of it. Hua Hong watched him leave, wondering if she should inform Nong Rio on. The scene changed to the interior of what appeared to be a medical room. A doctor informed Cheon Muriang that they had administered emergency treatment. The doctor explained a cure was impossible without the Tang clan's antidote. Wo Young lay in bed, sweating heavily with dark veins on her skin. Cheon Muriang looked down at her with a grim and determined expression. He turned to leave the room, telling Hua Hong to look after Wo Young. Hua Hong asked where he was going as he retrieved his sword from her. He stated that his father's banquet was tonight and he must be there. Cheon Muriang thought to himself that for today he would play the deadbeat son. A bearded man in a red cloak walked down a long, sunlit hallway. He questioned his brother's decision to involve the Tang clan, fearing their power. A close-up of the bearded man's eye showed his serious and concerned expression. The man suddenly stopped walking in the middle of the corridor. He sensed a vicious aura and looked around, wondering about its source. The scene shifted to a fast-moving view of a gate as he asked who it was. Birds were startled from the trees, flying away in a panic. In the forest, Cheon Muriang gripped his sword with intense focus. He practiced his swordsmanship, repeatedly striking a thick bamboo stalk. The bearded man had arrived and now watched Cheon Muriang's furious training. Man stood with his arms crossed, observing the sword practice sternly. He internally concluded that this was not the heaven-severing sword technique. For a moment, he identified the style as a man-slashing sword filled with killing intent. The man worried that the technique was dangerous and would consume him. Cheon Muriang let out a loud cry as he raised his sword for a final strike. He brought his glowing sword down in a powerful vertical slash. The two halves of the massive bamboo stalk began to fall apart. After the stalk was destroyed, Cheon Muriang stood with his back turned. He panted heavily, his face covered in sweat after the intense practice. The bearded man approached, asking if he was just venting anger on a tree. He stood before Cheon Muriang and asked him what he was so angry about. With his back still turned, Cheon Muriang stated that he was weak. He continued that he must become stronger to protect his people from harm. The bearded man looked confused and asked who he meant by my people. Cheon Muriang stated he was protecting those he wished to care for. The patriarch looked surprised, recalling his son's previous use of the phrase. In a flashback, he asked if his son meant people to protect. The patriarch smiled slightly, admitting to himself that he had been narrow-minded. He shouted good and reminded him of his claim to mimic any sword art. The patriarch challenged Cheon Muriang to prove his words to him right now. Cheon Muriang looked at his uncle with a confused expression, asking him to clarify. The patriarch explained that he created the Dragon Claw Rain and its next form. He said he never taught the next form because it was too dangerous. With an intense expression, he asked Cheon Muriang if he wanted to learn it. He declared he would demonstrate the final form of the Heavenly Dragon Sword. The patriarch shouted the name of the technique, the Dragon Rage. Cheon Muriang watched in shock as a powerful pink aura enveloped his uncle. The patriarch executed a powerful downward strike called the Reverse Scale Slash. Attack created a massive whirlwind that cut through the treetop. 3 men in blue robes saw the whirlwind and noted it was near the young master. One of the men told the others to finish hiding clothes before they investigated. A hand held a vial of poison that would paralyze a person. The 3 men walked along a path confident in their disguise and plan. Cheon Muriang looked at his torn sleeves sweating after the powerful display. He looked toward his uncle's silhouette and asked if he meant to kill him. Standing in the destroyed training area, he commented on the immense power. The patriarch appeared and asked if he understood the difference between the form. He explained that swordsmen feel the sword as part of their body. The patriarch continued stating that the Dragon Claw Rain technique exploits this illusion. Cheon Muriang finally understood the essence of the Dragon Claw Rain technique, but his uncle warned that even this move fails against powerful master. He remembered his recent defeat where that same technique had failed him. His uncle then revealed a secret that even the strongest masters fall for. With an intense gaze, the patriarch asked if he knew what it was. Cheon Muriang suddenly realized the answer was the Reverse Scale Slash. His uncle then challenged him to perform that incredibly difficult move. Looking at the destroyed bamboo, he wondered if he had to do it now. Instead, he confidently vowed to master the technique before the banquet. The patriarch clarified he meant his vow to protect the entire Cheon clan. For a moment, Cheon Muriang was taken aback by the serious question. Then a small, confident smile formed on his lip. He stood tall and firmly declared that he would uphold his vow. His uncle simply said good and placed a hand on his sword. He mentioned that some rats were disturbing the energy nearby. The patriarch then walked away, leaving him alone in the forest. Cheon Muriang smiled to himself, whispering, "Now then," under his breath. His expression turned menacing as he decided to find these so-called rat. Nearby, 3 men in blue robes were hiding and watching him from the bush. One worried they were noticed, but another planned to poison him anyway. Suddenly, the 3 men leaped out from their hiding spot into the clearing. They bowed and claimed to be Cheon clan trainees who had disturbed him. Cheon Muriang immediately called their bluff, pointing out their aged face. He offered a spar to find out who they really were. Their leader silently signaled his men to subdue him with a paralyzing poison. Meanwhile, the Cheon clan had many other training grounds in secluded forest. In one of them, men head defeated were training intensely with wooden sword. One trainee, Nung Ryoan, vowed to get his real sword back from him. Another lifted heavy stones promising victory in their next rematch. A man in a blue robe then ran toward them shouting about a big problem. He found the trainees so immersed in training they didn't even notice him. Sweating nervously, the messengers started to talk about the eldest young master. Every trainee stopped instantly, their eyes glowing with intense focus. The man called them obsessed and urged them to come see something incredible. Back in the sunlit forest, leaves scattered from the speed of a fight, Cheon Muriang was striking a bearded man with the flat of his sword. He stood over 2 fallen men while blocking a strike from that same attacker. Then he dodged and slammed his sheathed sword's hilt into the man's chest. The bearded man reeled backward from the sheer force of the blow. His eyes rolled back in pain as he groaned and then collapsed. Cheon Muriang now stood over the unconscious body of the bearded man. The last attacker got to his knees, staring at his fallen comrade. He realized their target was far stronger than they had ever expected. Their disguise had backfired since he couldn't properly use a Tang clan saber. Gritting his teeth, he knew they had greatly underestimated their opponent. Cheon Muriang demanded to know his identity, saying he already had a hunch. But the man raised a dagger to his own throat, claiming there was no proof. Cheon Muriang scoffed, asking who else but the Tang clan would do that. The man's eyes widened in shock, realizing he had been found out. With a smirk, he declared this was enough to cancel the marriage arrangement. The last guard just grinned, calling the young master completely naive. He stood over the 2 defeated men and prepared for his final attack. Next, he then leaped high into the air, diving down with his sword. With a powerful shout, he unleashed the legendary Reverse Scale Slash. The final guard screamed as he raised his sword to block the glowing attack. From the treetops, startled birds scattered at the sound of the clash. Elsewhere in the forest, another bearded man checked a simple sundial. He noted that 45 minutes had passed since his men left. A concerned expression crossed his face as he wondered if they had failed. He decided he had to destroy the evidence since burial wouldn't be enough. The trainees were discussing the Tang clan's recent attempt to kill a maid. One of them explained that for the Tang clan, such cruelty is their law. Their poisons and hidden weapons make it impossible to ever punish them. Another added that they execute anyone who even touches their direct family. A brief memory showed men recoiling in fear from a Tang clan woman. One trainee admitted he feared the alliance and preferred their own clan's way. Others agreed, praising their clan for being fair even to older members. Someone pointed out that a trainee who defied the young master was still alive. That same trainee angrily declared the Tang clan was looking down on them. He insisted they had to help the young master fight back against them. But Neong Ryo-won looked thoughtful, wondering how they could possibly help. A man in a black beanie stepped forward, calling it a matter of prestige. He told everyone to find the young master, but they watched him with distrust. Away from the others, the man in the beanie saw this as his opportunity. He smirked, even planning to hand the young master over if it helped him. A different man in blue watched a bearded warrior preparing a small fire. He wondered why a Tang clan warrior would be in this part of the forest. It was even stranger that the warrior was trying to burn a set of clothes. The Tang clan warrior blew on the tinder and a small flame finally caught. Suddenly, he looked up with a shocked expression, sensing he was being watched. From the warrior's perspective, a man in blue was standing on the ridge above. The man in blue panicked, realizing he had just been discovered. He stumbled backward and tumbled right down the path to his two companions. A terrified and pained expression was frozen on his face as he lay there. His friends looked down at him, asking what was wrong as he sat up. He just stared back up the path, terrified by the secret he had just seen. While his companions stood over him, a sudden noise came from above. The Tang clan warrior leaped from the ridge, his sword drawn and ready. Looking back in horror, the fallen man on the ground cursed his bad luck. The warrior instantly cut down his two friends, as the survivor thought he knew this would happen.